Hello, how are you doing today? My name is Leslie Lobotomy, and welcome to this first episode of Weird New Mexico, a podcast that tells you about the weird, spooky, scary, weird-ass shit that happens on out here. So, we're going to go ahead and get started, and it's a pretty interesting state, to tell you the truth. We're going to start off by saying some history of our state, like who we are, to give you a pretty good idea of what we're going to talk about, subject matter. So first of all, I'm going to tell you that New Mexico is the 47th state of the United States of America. We are located in the lower southwestern portion of the United States, and we're a mountain state in the southern Rocky Mountains. We border the states of Colorado, Utah, and Arizona, and I'm in the northwest corner in that Four Corners area, and it's pretty weird up here. There's a lot of shit that goes on out here. But anyway, so to give you a brief rundown, we are have a very diverse landscape of desert. We have 121,591 square miles of complex history, geology, and mythology, which is a lot of what we'll be discussing in this podcast. Is that a lot of this mythology is true, real, and I've seen some of it. So, and this is where I come in. Myself and others have had some strange and unexplained experience in this area, and even the other states of the Four Corners are connected, and there's a connection to even Oak Ridge. So we'll talk about that too sometime. And these myths and legends and conspiracies are being proven as being real. There's a lot more reports of the UFOs and aliens. We'll be talking about that. We're going to be talking about crazy locations like haunted and phantom highways, rivers, mountains, and canyons. We're going to be talking about the typical conspiracies, I guess you could say, even though we don't want to get too out of control on those. We don't want to start any problems, if you know what I mean. And we're going to be presenting stories of cryptids, skinwalkers, Legend of La Llorona, and speak of Los Alamos, White Sands, and we're going to be kicking off what we're talking about with as far as the history of New Mexico and all the weirdness. We're going to be speaking about the Manhattan Project and the nuclear bomb. So that brings us back to the rest of my rundown, that we are the birthplace of the nuclear bomb. We have a very rich history of the ancient Pueblo people, native indigenous first people out here. And then, of course, Los Alamos National Labs, connected with the Manhattan Project, of course, and many other strange occurrences. The Roswell incident, need I say more about that? And related to that Roswell incident, a year later, we had our own incident right here, like 2 miles away from my house, in Aztec, in the northwestern corner of the New Mexico, right? So I'll be covering that, because we used to have a UFO convention revolving that in the March of every year. And I went to a few of those. I even got to meet David Hatcher Childress one time, and that was really neat. That was really awesome. But it was just, we live in a small town, so it's not something that we were able to keep up on, because it was brought together by the Friends of the Library. And you know how, books aren't really supported much anymore, so, with the computers. But that's okay, right? Okay, so, on with the rest. So, how about we talk about a little bit of our state symbols? Yeah, state symbols. Because, for example, our state flower is the yucca, and it's a beautiful plant. In fact, I'll have a picture of one sometime. I haven't gotten that far in the prepping of this podcast at all, so we're going to see what we're going to do about that. But with the yucca is commonly used in ceremonies, Native American indigenous ceremonies. It's been a part of the New Mexico landscape for generations and centuries and even thousands of years, because it's a plant that's like no other. It's beautiful. It's sharp and scary and dangerous too, because this is it's a rosette of evergreen, sword-like. They're very tough and hard, similar to like aloe leaves, but they're spiky and they hurt. You don't want to fall into one of those. Oh my God, you could lose an eye. You could, it's bad. But these pinnacles, they have these pinnacles of a flower right in the center of this rosette of needles. Giant, big-ass needles. And what's interesting about these needles is they've been used in old cultural times as combs, brushes. Let's see. The trunk and the fibers. They'll wrap it and strip it, and they'll take the yucca fibers and make like threads and any kind of strong rope-like material that they need. It's desirable for starting fires with friction. And it's used by the tribes for many other purposes, like the shampoo. I bet you would have never guessed that you could use plant. It's around the root, at the bottom of the pinnacle of flowers, and it's below the ground, and you've got to dig the plant out to reach the soft, spongy, white, kind of a creamish off-white root, is really the best way I could put it. And this is what they use as shampoo, and usually they use it especially for ceremonies and rituals. And I don't have much information about that right now, but you would just just slice it up, grind it, and put it into a pulp, and there you go. You got some shampoo, old desert style shampoo. So that's why I mentioned the yucca, because the yucca is significant in cultural background of here in the landscape. And there's going to be times when I'm going to be telling stories where, say, someone saw something moving in the yuccas, and some people might not know what a yucca is. So yeah, but anyway, we also have a state aircraft. I never knew states could have a state aircraft, but it's the hot air balloon. I will cover the hot air balloon fiesta at some point. And our state animal is the New Mexico black bear. Our state bear, or our state bird, is the roadrunner, and those are fucking cool, man. It's also known as a ground cuckoo. So Only a bird called the cuckoo would be representative of a state that's so fucking weird and bizarre. The official name is a Geococcix. The Geococcix chaparral cock, which is the Cucullidae family and its order of Cuculliformes. It has a year span, a 7 to 8 year lifespan, and it's the fastest flying bird. It's about 2 feet long, and from its white tail tip to from its the bill to its white tip of a tail, about 2 feet long, and it's got a crest. You know, it's like a crest going on, like it's mottled plumage, and when they run, they obviously have this level with their head and their tail, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with the roadrunner and the coyote. Well, it's a pretty accurate description. The only thing is, a roadrunner is no way that big. And that roadrunner is like an ostrich. And if we really had roadrunners the size of ostriches, we would be in big trouble. So, nah. And then we have like many other state symbols like the turquoise. Now that is something else that is very significant in New Mexico culture. There's shit, man. I mean, people pay lots and lots of money for turquoise, and turquoise is everywhere, but it really has a lot to do with the refining and the cutting and the shining and some beautiful work. And with this turquoise, it's an opaque blue-green mineral, and it's of hydrated phosphate, copper, and aluminum with chemical ration. What does that say? With the chemical formula of CuAi6PO440H842H2O. So, that's, if you know your science and elementals, that probably makes sense to you, because I read it off so fast without being very detailed of what is what. So I just said it. So anyway, it's a rare, valuable, and fine grades, and it's prized as a gemstone in ornaments that are thousands of years old, that are very, very important to the native cultures out here, like the squash blossom necklace, which happens to be our state jewelry. I didn't know we had a state jewelry either, or any state had a state jewelry, but the squash blossom necklace is often recognized as being the southwestern jewelry and the traditions of the Dene people, who are more commonly known as the Navajo tribe, but that's not a good word. Nobody likes that word. Navajo's not a nice word. They have always called themselves Dene, which means the people, and it is more appropriate to call them by their name that they call themselves. And also the Zuni and the Hopi, they also use these squash blossom necklaces. And as far as some plains tribes, like say the Comanche and the Cherokee, they're not too far from here. And the Dene are believed to be the first tribe to begin using the squash blossom design around the 1870s. And by the turn of the 20th century, several of the other surrounding tribes started using the design as well. The elements of the squash blossom necklace originated in ancient cultures, but come together as a uniquely Dene tradition. In the American Southwest, the Spanish and the Moorish influences introduced the Naha stone. Now, the Naha shape, which can be traced back through multiple cultures to Paleolithic times, it's let's say a horseshoe. It's like a horseshoe kind of upside down crescent shape. And eventually I'm going to have a picture of one of those to show you too. So, but the word Naha in the native language of the Dene people means crescent shape or curve, just like I described. So the Naha shape was used to decorate the horse bridles of the Spanish, and over time was adopted for the centerpiece of the squash blossom necklace. And I will cover at some point that the Spanish pretty much settled, it was the late 16th century, so by the time we got to the 19th and 20th century, it was already being used, and it came from the other side of the world. So, the squash blossom beads are named the beads that spread out for their likeness to an actual squash or pomegranate blossoms. Although sometimes the design does not exactly actually incorporate the beads that spread out. Early on, the beads used were round and simple. Sometimes dimes and quarters were used. And today you will find collectible pieces with bench handmade flutes. I'm just going to have to get some pictures. Intricately designed cast beads. There are artisans who work in styles reminiscent of the early styles using traditional cluster work. Vintage coin and sterling silver beads, while contemporary styles incorporate the Navajo stone. And to make striking modern legacy pieces. Beautiful stuff. You can find these everywhere in New Mexico, because we've got a lot of your museums, and I don't want to really call them trading companies. I don't want to say pawn shop, because they're not pawn shops, but you could get them there too. But they're the nice places are referred to as trading companies. And there's a place out here called Fifth Generation Trading Company in Farmington, and that's a cool place to visit. I'm not meaning to do any kind of promoting for anyone, but that's a cool place. So the squash blossom sets and necklaces today are not only made with sterling silver, but they're also made with gold and mixed metals, and with a variety of stone, including the high-grade blue, green, turquoise, gaspionite, red coral, and white buffalo, spiny oyster, and other similar favorites. Perhaps the most attractive quality of the squash blossom design is the strength it portrays on the individual wearing it. There's a sense of individuality and boldness that is incorporated with each squash blossom necklace, and this can be found similar with the war bonnet of the Plains Indians. I remember seeing and reading an article about how there was I don't want to say scandal, but some people were upset that people were wearing the war bonnet when it wasn't applicable to that situation that individual was in, and so it caused quite a bit of a stir. But it's correct, a war bonnet and squash blossom necklaces and any other kind of traditional Native American decorative attire is sacred. Very sacred and important, and it's not just... There's a reason why this stuff isn't sold in Walmart. I guess you could say. So, that is what we got there. And to go back to our state animal, I forgot that I actually had a little bit of information based on our state animal, the black bear. Our state animal is Smokey Bear, to be precise, because that's where he was found. I'm sure everybody has heard of Smokey Bear, only you could prevent forest fires, right? Well, he was born here. He was actually born in 1944, but the actual bear himself was found in 1950. That confused me for a little while at first, because the USDA Forest Service and the Ad Council agreed that a fictional bear named Smokey would be the symbol for forest fire prevention. Artist Albert Stell was asked to paint the first poster of Smokey, and he was pouring a bucket of water on a campfire and saying, "Care will prevent 9 out of 10 fires." So Smokey Bear soon became very popular, and his image appeared on a lot of forest fire prevention materials. In 1947, his slogan became the familiar, "Only you can prevent forest fires," which was later updated to be "Only you can prevent wildfires." So then in the spring of 1950, in the Capitan Mountains of New Mexico, a beautiful place to go, by the way. Okay, so a young bear found himself caught in a burning forest, and he climbed a tree to survive, because it was on fire. I mean, there's been a lot of photos, lots of photos of the condition. I mean, it's reminiscent of the Yellowstone fire. Well, not just Yellowstone, but all the fires that have been going on lately. But when you think about it in comparison, it's kind of a small fire, but it raged. It burned those mountains bad. But so he was able to get up a tree to survive, but he was still badly burned. There's photos of him with his little paws bandaged. Poor little guy. He was just a little guy, and the firefighters who retrieved him were so moved by his bravery, they named him Smokey. And so news about this real bear named Smokey spread across the nation, and he was soon given a new home. They gave him a new home at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., and he was now the living symbol of Smokey Bear. He played an important role in spreading messages of wildfire prevention and forest conservation, but he died in 1976. I mean, God, that made him like 26 years old for a bear. And he was returned to Capitan, New Mexico, so where he is buried at the State Historical Park, now called Smokey Bear Historical Park. Now, you can find out more by writing him a letter, apparently. You can write Smokey Bear a letter at Smokey Bear, Washington, D.C., 20252. Now, there isn't an actual address of where this letter is going to go from the looks of this information I have here. So, maybe Smokey Bear just lives all over Washington, D.C. I don't know. But, I think that's going to cover about enough of that stuff. You know, we're going to start getting into the more important things, like the subject matter of this show. So, before we do that, maybe I should talk about green chili. Nah, I'll talk about that another time. It's not important right now. I got to get this show on the road. So, with that said, we're going to take a break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about the Manhattan Project. And the big, I guess you could call it a flare gun that shot in the sky that got a lot of attention from a lot of things that aren't from here. So, we'll catch you in a few.
From the land of the free. But don't blame me, we got the neutron bomb. We got the neutron bomb. We got the neutron bomb. Don't understand you, don't know what you mean. We don't want you, we want you machine. United Nations and NATO will do. It's just a red, white, and blue. We got the neutron bomb. We got the neutron bomb. We got the neutron bomb. The way it's got out. Survival of the fittest, the way it's gone. We don't want it, we don't want it. Don't blame me. We don't want it, we don't want it. Don't blame me. Don't blame me. We got the neutron bomb. We got the neutron bomb. We got the neutron bomb. Gonna drop it all over the place. You're gonna get it on your face. Throwing aid from the land of the free. But don't blame me. We got the neutron bomb. We got the neutron bomb. We got the neutron bomb. We got. We got. We got the neutron bomb. We got the neutron bomb. We got the neutron. Drop it. Oh, we don't want it, but we got it anyway. Oh, we don't want it, but we got it anyway. We don't want it, but we got it anyway. We don't want it, but we got it anyway. We don't want it, but we got it
Hello and welcome back to this podcast about Weird New Mexico. We're starting off with some nuclear information. Well, not really nuclear information, but let's just say what pretty much put New Mexico on the map in a popular sense that got us into history books is the Manhattan Project. And so that's what I'm going to start the series on, is the Manhattan Project. And it's took place in White Sands National Park now, and it's like no other place else on Earth. I unfortunately have yet to go there. I haven't been there yet, but it's definitely on my bucket list, so I'll get there at some point. But it rises out from the heart of the Tularosa Basin, and it's one of the world's greatest natural wonders. The glistening white sands of New Mexico are great wave-like structured dunes of gypsum and have engulfed 275 square miles of desert, creating the world's largest gypsum dune field. And the park preserves a major portion of this unique dune field, along with the plants and animals that live there. Now, this place closes down a lot. The roads close quite consistently because they still do missile testing. So, hard at work, still making nukes. Well, I don't know why we need more. I think we got enough. I think just a few would do the job. But anyway, okay, so the Manhattan Project was a research and development undertaking during World War II, and it produced the first nuclear weapons. It was led by the United States and with the support of the United Kingdom and Canada. From 1942 to 1946, the project was under the direction of Major General Leslie Groves of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Nuclear physicist Robert Oppenheimer was the director of the Los Alamos laboratory that designed the actual bombs. The Army component of the project was designated as the Manhattan District, but because its first headquarters was located in Manhattan, but it eventually superseded the official code name, which was the development of substitute materials for the entire project. So along the way, the project absorbed its earlier British counterpart, the tube alloys. I should have looked that up, but it's not really in too much importance as far as New Mexico goes. So the Manhattan Project began modestly in 1939, but grew to employ more than 100,000 or 130,000 people, and cost nearly the U.S. $2 billion, which by today's calculation would be, as 2020, $23 billion. And so over 90% of the cost was for building the factories and to produce the actual fissile material, with less than 10% going to production to produce the actual weapons. So research and production took place at more than 30 sites across the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. 30 sites, that's a lot of testing sites. So, a quick rundown, the Manhattan Project was active between the years of 1942 and 1946, disbanded on August 15th in 1947. The parties involved was the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada, and the branch involved was the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. What's interesting is the garrison headquarters is located in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. That's interesting to know. Engagements involved were the Allied invasion of Italy, the Allied invasion of France, the Allied invasion of Germany, and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, along with the Allied occupation of Japan. So, there's a lot going on there as far as Manhattan Project is concerned. So there's notable commanders during the time known as James C. Marshall and Kenneth Nichols, and they played a big part of it, but I don't have any information about them either. I didn't go into that much detail because, I have a timestamp on this. So the project led to the development of two types of atomic bombs, both developed concurrently during the war. A relatively simple gun-type fission weapon and a more complex implosion-type nuclear weapon were developed. The Thin Man gun-type design proved to be impractical use with plutonium. I can imagine why. And so a simpler gun type called Little Boy was developed that used uranium-235, and it's an isotope that makes up only 0.7% of natural uranium. So because it was chemically identical to the most common isotope, uranium-238, and had almost the same mass, separating the two proved difficult, and so three methods were employed for uranium enrichment, and that was electromagnetic, gaseous, and thermal. And scientists conducted most of this work at the Clinton Engineer Works at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Of course, again. We're going to see Oak Ridge pop up a lot during all of this, so don't be surprised. Even though it's not in New Mexico, it's like they're all connected. And so, in parallel with the work on uranium was an effort to produce plutonium, which researchers at the University of California, Berkeley discovered in 1940. After the feasibility of the world's first artificial nuclear reactor, the Chicago Pile No. 1, it was demonstrated in 1942 at the Metallurgical Laboratory at the University of Chicago. The project designed the X-10 graphite reactor at Oak Ridge and the production reactors at the Hanford site in Washington State, in which uranium was irradiated and transmuted into plutonium. The plutonium was then chemically separated from the uranium using the bismuth phosphate process. So, side note, I'm pretty familiar. I have a hobby that I'm pretty familiar with the chemical extractions of substances. So, it's good to know. So, the Fat Man plutonium implosion type weapon was developed in a concerted design and development effort by the Los Alamos Laboratory. The project was also charged with gathering intelligence on the German nuclear weapon project as well. Though Operation Alsos, Manhattan Project personnel served in Europe, sometimes behind enemy lines, and there they gathered nuclear materials and documents and rounded up German scientists. Despite the Manhattan Project's tight security, Soviet atomic spies successfully penetrated the program. So, the first nuclear device ever detonated was an implosion-type bomb during the Trinity test, conducted at New Mexico's Alamogordo Bombing and Gunnery Range on July 16th, 1945. Little Boy and Fat Man bombs were used a month later in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively, with Manhattan Project personnel serving as bomb assembly technicians and weaponeers on the attack aircraft. In the immediate post-war years, the Manhattan Project conducted weapons at Bikini Atoll as part of Operation Crossroads. And what's unfortunate about Bikini Atoll is the only footage I've ever seen is it's all aerial, and it's because they've done so much testing there that it's radiated, so nobody can go there anymore. And it's really unfortunate because it looks like a really neat place to go. But anyway, they developed new weapons, they promoted the development of the network of national laboratories, and supported medical research into radiology, and laid the foundations for the nuclear navy. My father, well, he's not really a father-in-law, but he's an older guy. He was in the military during Vietnam, but he joined the Navy to avoid ground war. So, point is, he rode around for many years in a nuclear sub, so they're pretty crowded, I hear. But anyway, so it maintained control over American atomic weapons research and production until the formation of the United States Atomic Energy Commission in January of 1947. So, that's some pretty good information to know so far, I suppose. I have to get all my information together. So, I'm going to take a real quick break to make sure all my papers are in order. So, I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. I got my papers back together. Okay, so continuing on, there's a 1945 Life article estimated that before the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, probably no more than a few dozen men in the entire country knew the full meaning of the Manhattan Project, and perhaps only 1,000 others even were aware that work on atoms was even involved. So the magazine wrote that more than 100,000 others employed with the project worked like moles in the dark, and warned that disclosing the project's secrets was punishable by 10 years in prison and or a fine of US dollars of 10,000, which today, it says here with 2021 that comes to $151,000. So they saw enormous quantities of raw materials enter factories with nothing coming out, and monitored dials and switches while behind thick concrete walls mysterious reactions took place, without knowing what the nature of their job even was. So, I'm assuming, I hope that a lot of my listeners are, if you guys are even listening to this, are aware of Bob Lazar. I can't even say it right now. Bob Lazar. He has very similar experiences, so it goes to show that decades later it still happens, and he was experiencing this stuff decades ago. So, some food for thought on that. So in December 1945, the United States Army published a secret analyzing and assessing the security apparatus surrounding the Manhattan Project. The report states that the Manhattan Project was more drastically guarded than any other highly secret war development. The security infrastructure surrounding the Manhattan Project was so vast and thorough that in the early days of the project in 1943, potential employees and 600 companies that would be involved in all aspects of the project for potential security risks. So, Oak Ridge security personnel considered any private property with more than 7 people as suspicious, and residents who believed that U.S. government agents were secretly among them avoided repeatedly inviting the same guests over. And that is so strange, that... Anyway, so although original residents of the area could be buried in the existing cemeteries, every coffin was thoroughly inspected before placement. Opened for inspection, so everyone, including the top military officials and their automobiles, were always inspected thoroughly upon entering and exiting the project facilities. So one Oak Ridge worker stated that if you got inquisitive, you were called on the carpet within 2 hours by a government secret agent, and then those usually summoned were explained. Usually those summoned to explain were then escorted bag and baggage and told to keep going, never to be seen from again, or never to go back again. So despite being told that their work would help the war, end the war, and perhaps all future wars, not seeing or understanding the results of their often tedious duties or even typical side effects of factory work, such as the smoke and smokestacks in the war in Europe ending without the use of their work, caused serious morale and problems among workers and caused many rumors to spread. One manager stated after the war that, I quote, "Well, it wasn't that the job was tough, it was confusing. You see, no one knew what was being made in Oak Ridge, not even me, and a lot of the people thought they were wasting their time here. It was up to me to explain to the dissatisfied workers that they were doing a very important job, and when they'd ask me what it was, I'd have to tell them that it was a secret, but I almost went crazy myself trying to figure out what was really going on." Another worker told of how working in a laundry, she every day held a special instrument to uniforms and listened to a clicking noise. She learned only after the war that she had been performing the important task of checking for radiation with a Geiger counter. So to improve morale among such workers, Oak Ridge created an extensive program of intramural sports leagues, including 10 baseball teams, 81 softball teams, and 26 football teams. Wow. I don't know what to say about that one. Are there really that many employees to necessitate that many sports teams? Who knows? I'm not sure, and it's not important. I really don't care. I don't think anybody else does either. So, when it came to the Manhattan Project, there was obviously a lot of censorship involved regarding the private sector, the military sector, or the media. We all know how that goes, right? Okay, so voluntary censorship of atomic information began before the Manhattan Project even started. So, after the start of the European War, in 1939, American scientists began avoiding publishing military-related research, and in 1940, scientific journals began asking the National Academy of Science to clear articles. William L. Lawrence of the New York Times, who wrote an article on atomic fission in the Saturday Evening Post of September 7th, 1940, later learned that the government officials were asking librarians nationwide in 1943 to withdraw that issue. The Soviets noticed this silence, however, and in April 1942, nuclear physicist Georgy Flerov I butchered that one. Wrote to Joseph Stalin on the absence of the articles on nuclear fission in American journals that resulted in the Soviet Union itself establishing its own atomic bomb project. So the Manhattan Project operated under tight security, lest its discovery induce Axis powers, especially Germany, to accelerate their own nuclear projects or undertake covert operations against this project. So, the government's Office of Censorship, by its contrast, relied on the press to comply with a voluntary code of conduct it published. And the project at first avoided notifying the office. By early 1943, newspapers began publishing reports of large construction in Tennessee and Washington based on public records, and the office began discussing with the project how to maintain secrecy. So in June, the Office of Censorship asked newspapers and broadcasters to avoid discussing atom smashing, atomic energy, atomic fission, atomic splitting, or any of their equivalents. The use for military purposes of radium or radioactive materials, heavy water, high voltage discharge equipment, cyclotrons. And the office also asked to avoid discussion of polonium, uranium, ytterbium, hafnium, protactinium, rhodium, rhenium, thorium, and deuterium. Only uranium was sensitive, but was listed with other elements to hide its importance. So, you can guess that with all this kind of information, there's going to be enemies wanting that same information. And that's what brings us to the Soviet spies. Yeah, so spies. The prospect of sabotage is always present. Anyway, so sometimes suspected when there were equipment failures in particular, while there were some problems believed to be the result of careless or disgruntled employees, there were no confirmed instances of Axis-instigated sabotage. However, on March 10th, 1945, a Japanese fire balloon struck a power line, and the resulting power surge caused 3 reactors at Hanford to be temporarily shut down. With so many people involved, security was at a difficult task. A special counterintelligence corps detachment was formed to handle the project's security issues. So by 1943, it was clear that the Soviet Union was attempting to penetrate the project. Lieutenant Colonel Boris T. Pash, the head of the counterintelligence branch of the Western Defense Command, investigated suspected Soviet espionage at the radiation laboratory in Berkeley. Oppenheimer informed Pash that he had been approached by a fellow professor at Berkeley, Hakon Chevalier, about passing information onto the Soviet Union. The most successful Soviet spy, however, was Klaus Fuchs, a member of the British mission who played an important part at Los Alamos. In the 1950 revelation... Oh. I lost another paper. Okay, now we're back. Now that I got my papers back together, I can continue with what I was saying. So I was talking about how the most successful Soviet spy was Klaus Fuchs, and he was a member of the British mission who played an important part at Los Alamos. And the 1950 revelation espionage activities damaged the United States' nuclear cooperation with Britain and Canada. Subsequently, other instances of espionage were uncovered, leading to the arrest of Harry Gold, David Greenglass, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. And other spies like George Koval and Theodore Hall remained undetected and unknown for decades. So the value of espionage is difficult to quantify, but as the principal constraint on the Soviet atomic bomb project, the consensus is that the espionage saved the Soviets 1 or 2 years of effort. Okay, so that sounds like typical old espionage information that you would come across in those days. So that leads us to foreign intelligence other than just Soviet intelligence. Even though they were an ally. This is more the Axis espionage. So in addition to developing the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project was charged with gathering intelligence on German nuclear energy projects. It was believed that the Japanese nuclear weapons program was not far advanced at all, because Japan had little access to uranium and any kind of other ores. But it was initially feared that Germany was very close to developing its own weapons. And at the instigation of the Manhattan Project, a bombing and sabotage campaign was carried out against heavy water plants in German-occupied Norway. A small mission was created, jointly staffed by the Office of Naval Intelligence, the OSRD, by the Manhattan Project, and Army Intelligence G2, and to investigate enemy scientific developments. It was not restricted to those involving nuclear weapons. The Chief of Army Intelligence, Major General George V. Strong, appointed Boris Pash to command the unit, which was codenamed Alsos, which is a Greek word meaning grove. And the Alsos mission to Italy questioned the staff of the physics laboratory at the University of Rome, following the capture of the city in June 1944. And meanwhile, Pash formed a combined alliance of British and American Alsos mission in London, under the command of Captain Horace C. Calvert, to participate in Operation Overlord. Groves considered the risk the Germans might be able to attempt to disrupt the Normandy landings with radioactive poisons as sufficient to warn General Dwight D. Eisenhower and send an officer to brief his chief of staff, Lieutenant General Walter Beadle Smith. Under the code name Operation Peppermint. Special equipment was prepared in chemical warfare service terms or trained in its use. So following the wake of the advancing Allied armies, Pash and Calvert interviewed Frederic Joliot-Curie about the activities of German scientists. They spoke to officials at Union Miniere de Haute-Cataga about uranium shipments to Germany. They tracked down 68 tons from Belgium and 30 tons in France. The interrogation of German prisoners indicated that uranium and thorium were being processed in Oranienburg. I'm sorry, I pronounced that totally wrong. Which is 20 miles north of Berlin. And so Groves arranged for it to be bombed on March 15th, 1945. Deal with that. There you go. So the political and cultural impacts of the development of nuclear weapons were profound and far-reaching. So William Lawrence of the New York Times, the first to use the phrase atomic age, became the official correspondent for the Manhattan Project in the spring of 1945. In 1943 and 1944, he unsuccessfully attempted to persuade the Office of Censorship to permit writing about the explosive potential of uranium, and government officials felt that he had every right to report on the biggest secret of the war. So Lawrence witnessed both the Trinity's test and the bombing of Nagasaki and wrote the official press release prepared for them. He went on to write a series of articles extolling the rights of the new weapon. His reporting before and after of the bombings helped to spur public awareness of the potential of nuclear technology and motivated its development in the United States and the Soviet Union. So the wartime Manhattan Project left a legacy in the form of the network of national laboratories. We've got the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, Los Alamos National Laboratory, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Argonne National Laboratory, and Ames Laboratory. So the two more were established by Groves soon after the war, and that would be the Brookhaven National Laboratory in Upton, New York, and Sandia National Labs in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So the Groves had allocated $72 million to them for research activities in fiscal year 1946 and 1947. They would be in the vanguard of the kind of large-scale research that Alvin Weinberg, the director of the Oak Ridge National Lab, would call big science. Big science. Yeah, I like that. So the Naval Research Laboratory had long been interested in the prospect of using nuclear power for warship propulsion and sought to create its own nuclear project themselves. In May of 1946, Nimitz, and now Chief of Naval Operations, decided that the Navy should instead work with the Manhattan Project. and a group of naval officers were assigned to Oak Ridge, the most senior of whom was Captain Hyman G. Rickover, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, who became assistant director there. They immersed themselves in the study of nuclear energy, laying the foundations for a nuclear-powered Navy. A similar group of Air Force personnel arrived at Oak Ridge in September 1946 with the aim of developing nuclear aircraft. Their nuclear energy for the propulsion of aircraft, also known as NEPA, project ran into formidable technical difficulties and was ultimately canceled. The ability for the new reactors to create radioactive isotopes in previously unheard of quantities sparked a revolution in nuclear medicine in the immediate post-war years. Starting in mid-1946, Oak Ridge began distributing radioisotopes to the hospitals and universities, and most of the orders were for iodine-131 and phosphorus-32, which were used in the diagnosis and treatment in cancer. In addition to medicine, isotopes are also used in biological, industrial, and agricultural research. And handing over control to the Atomic Energy Commission, Groves bid farewell to the people he had worked on the Manhattan Project. 5 years ago, the idea of atomic power was only a dream. You have made that dream a reality. You have seized upon the most nebulous of ideas and translated them into actualities. You have built cities where none were known before. You have constructed a magnitude to a precision hitherto deemed impossible. You built the weapon which ended the war and thereby saved countless American lives. With regard to peacetime applications, you have raised the curtain on vistas of a new world. So that's what I've got for you today regarding the Manhattan Project. It's pretty good information, and I guarantee there's so much more there's just so much more information going on when it comes to Manhattan Project, because you end up getting Project Blue Book and the Majestic 12 as a result of the happenings at the Trinity site in White Sands Monument. Beautiful white sand dunes. So that's going to wrap it up for this today. I'm really glad you came and listened to my podcast. It's new. We're going to start getting into some deeper material, wider range material that I'm sure you'll be really interested in. It's going to be good. It's going to be interesting. And I want to let you know that I would like to have be an interactive podcast. So everybody's invited to give me a call and share your own crazy stories of the wild and spooky of your area. And maybe, we'll put on the air, read your story. You can either give me a call at 505-337-0137 or send me an email at cosmosrx77starside@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter, and that's at Lobato1Leslie, spelled capital Lobato, number 1, capital Leslee. And I hope to see you again. We'll have another episode soon. It's going to be primarily focused on UFOs, aliens, and the crash sites that we know of so far. So, it's going to be good. Catch you later.